Mara Ellison hit the ranch house door with both fists while sleet hissed off the roof and tore the last veil pins from her hair. Her wedding hem dragged black with mud. One sleeve hung half-ripped from the shoulder, and there was only one thought beating through her hard enough to keep her upright. If a stranger opened this door and saw what was behind her, would he send her back anyway? When the door opened, she shoved her face into the crack and said, "If you turn me away tonight, you'll be burying me by morning." The man on the other side held a lantern low and a rifle loose in one scarred hand. Light cut across a face weathered by sun and grief, a pale line running from his jaw into his beard, and eyes so gray they looked like creek water under ice. He took in the wedding silk beneath her stolen coat, the bruises lifting under her glove, and the black road behind her where no decent thing would be traveling in that storm. Then he stepped aside. "Sit," he said. She did not move. "You know what I might be bringing here?" "Trouble," he said. "Storm's already brought some. Sit down." Her knees decided before pride could. He set the rifle near the door, poured broth into a chipped bowl, and turned his face aside while she shrugged off the coat. Under it, the cream wedding dress looked absurd in that rough little room. Lace torn, hem ruined, gold thread at the bodice catching lantern light like a lie that had not yet learned shame. "Name," he said. "Mara." "Last." She swallowed. "Ellison. For now. Vance if men like him get their way." That made him look up. "Josiah Vance." Fear closed around her ribs again. "You know him?" "I know the kind." He set the bowl in front of her. "I'm Eli Mercer. Eat before your hands forget what they're for." The broth was rabbit and onion, thin but hot. It shook her all the way through. She had not eaten since dawn. Since the church. Since Josiah Vance took her hand before the minister and smiled with that patient certainty that had fooled half the town. Widower. Merchant. Church donor. A man with a good code, a good reputation, and a habit of arranging other people's lives until they mistook gratitude for consent. Eli fed wood into the stove as if runaway brides and storms were ordinary business. "How many saw you leave?" "The minister. 2 women from church. The driver who pitted me. Josiah. Maybe more by now." "Anyone follow you here?" "I changed wagons in town. Walked the creek for a stretch." "I don't think so. But men like him don't stop because weather turns bad. They just bring thicker coats." That almost counted as a smile at Eli's mouth. True enough. His eyes lifted toward the loft and the square trapdoor above it. A leather pole hung from the edge. "There's an attic crawl space," he said. "Only place nobody sees from the yard. If riders come, you stay low and stay silent. Men like Vance don't look up unless they expect to own the roof too." "You hide strangers often?" One corner of his mouth moved. "Only brides on blizzard nights." Against all sense, Mara laughed. Short and cracked, but real. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. There is something comforting about knowing how many lamps are lit beyond this one, and how many good hearts are keeping company with us in the dark." He took the lantern and led her to the loft. The attic smelled of old pine, dust, and the sweet ghost of apples. A pallet rested beneath the slope of the roof. A wool blanket. A chipped pitcher, too carefully arranged to have been made in a hurry. "Who slept here?" Mara asked. Eli set the lantern down. "My wife when she got sick. Easier to hear her from below. After she died, I kept the bed. After my little girl died, I kept the room." He touched the beam once with 2 fingers. A body gets used to grief if it isn't offered much else. Mara looked at the ribbon still hanging from a nail, the narrowness of the place, the tenderness of a room kept after it had any purpose. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "If you hear 3 taps on the beam, it's me. Anything else, you don't make a sound." "Why are you helping me?" He stood with one boot lower than the other on the ladder, favoring his left leg. "Because there are some doors a man can still choose not to open for wolves." An hour later, horses came through the storm. Mara dropped flat on the pallet. Through a seam in the floorboards, she saw Eli sit by the stove with the rifle across his knees. The pounding on the door was all fist. "Mercer, open up." He took his time. Snow blew in when he lifted the bar. Sheriff Bell stepped through first, red-faced from cold, with Josiah Vance at his shoulder in a black coat powdered white. Josiah removed his gloves finger by finger. He was handsome in the way polished knives are handsome. "Evening," he said. "Not much of one," Bell muttered. "We're looking for a missing woman." Josiah's voice smoothed over the room like oil. My intended bride suffered a distressing spell before the ceremony. I am concerned for her safety. Mara bit the heel of her hand so hard she tasted blood. Eli leaned back. Then I expect she's regretting her timing. Bell searched the room. Bed, trunk, shelf, hearth. He started toward the loft ladder when Eli said, very mildly, second rung's cracked. You put your boot there, you'll come down harder than you went up. Bell kicked it to test. It split and sagged. He swore and stepped back. You live quietly out here, he said. Peaceful habit, Eli answered. Josiah smiled without warmth. Peace grows expensive when a man starts interfering with lawful arrangements. Eli rested one hand over the rifle stock. A woman isn't a lawful arrangement because frightened men decide to call her one. Bell looked uncomfortable in a way the cold had nothing to do with. Josiah's eyes hardened. Mara's father accepted my terms. The debt was real. The match was proper. She is not suited to fend for herself. Seems she fended well enough to outrun you in a storm. Silence stretched. The stove ticked. Wind pushed against the walls. At last Josiah drew on his gloves. The snow will break. She'll be found. And if anyone here has chosen to interfere with a lawful contract, I will answer it with the bank note on this ranch before the thaw. He tipped his head. Good night, Mercer. Not yet, Eli said. But it might improve when you leave. The bar fell back into place after them. Mara did not move until 3 soft taps came through the beam. She opened the trap. Eli was still watching the door. He won't stop, she whispered. No. Men like him think patience means ownership delayed. Winter gives them time to make that mistake bigger. For the first week, Mara stayed in the attic by day and came down only after dark. Eli never asked for her whole story at once. He took it in pieces while mending tack, breaking kindling, or standing at the stove with coffee in both hands. Her mother had died when she was 13. Her father had been decent until debt made him frightened, and fright made him weak. Josiah Vance had bought the farm note after 2 failed seasons, extended the term, carried sugar and lamp oil to the house, and talked so softly about rescue that by the time he asked for Mara's hand, her father heard relief before he heard shame. He had cried when he agreed, and that was the part she could not forgive. Eli listened while lacing rawhide through a broken strap. Debt makes cowards out of people who thought they knew themselves. That sounds almost merciful. No. Mercy comes later, if it comes at all. That's only fact. It was the first line of his she carried like a coal inside her. His own story came in scraps too. His wife, Ruth, died of lung fever 3 winters earlier. Their little girl, Annie, lasted 6 months after that. Same cough. Same waiting. Same helpless fury dressed up as hope until there was no room left for hope to stand. You talk about sorrow like it's livestock, Mara said one night. Some mornings it stands at the gate bawling, Eli said. Best to work it through before it breaks the fence. Still, winter fought him daily. At dawn he broke trough ice with a maul and carried fork after fork of hay, while the cattle pressed their blunt heads against him in desperate trust. One morning a weak heifer went down near the lean-to and could not rise. Mara watched through the loft slit as Eli knelt in the drift, braced his shoulder against the animal, and heaved until she found her feet trembling. When he came in, beard crusted white, Mara had coffee waiting. He looked at the cup as if kindness had surprised him in his own house. You used the good grounds. If she lives, I wanted the day marked proper. His hands around the tin cup were red and split at the knuckles. Without thinking, Mara took one, turned it palm up, and saw the old rope scars crossing newer burns. I can help outside, she said. No. I can ride, stack hay, pull a calf, and shoot straighter than the men who taught me. He looked up then. Can you? Yes. Still no. The refusal stung because it sounded like every cage ever built for her own good. She set his hand down more sharply than she intended. If I hide while you freeze on my account, then he still owns the shape of my life. He only changed the room. That landed. She saw it. Eli stared into the steam. Keeping you safe and letting you stay yourself are not always the same road. It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in months. That evening he brought down an old dark coat from a cedar chest. Ruth's, he said. Wear it if you go to the yard after dark. From a distance, anyone watching sees a ranch wife or a ghost. Either should slow a man down. The wool smelled faintly of cedar and long-kept winter. Mara pulled it around herself and felt, strangely, not hidden but trusted. So she began helping in secret. Quick trips only, under dusk or blowing snow. She milked the red cow called Bess, calmed a skittish gelding by breathing into his nose, and shoveled the path between house and barn until hay dust lined her throat and rope burn woke her palms. The work steadied her. It returned her body to her. "That your idea of entertainment?" he asked. "These figures have more drama than some people I know." A laugh escaped him then, brief and rough and unexpectedly young. It changed his whole face. She stared. He looked startled by his own sound. By Christmas the storms eased for one blue, brittle day. Eli hitched the sled and went to the cottonwoods by the creek for wood. Mara was kneading bread when she saw a rider crest the rise through the loft slit. Black horse, black hat, no hurry. Josiah. He tied his horse at the barn and knocked like a gentleman. "Mara," he called. "I know you're here." She stood in the middle of the room with Eli's rifle in her hands and Ruth's coat around her shoulders. Outside, the yard lay bright with hard snow, too open to run across. She could bar the door. She could hide. She could answer. Every choice asked for blood somewhere. "Your father is ill with worry," Josiah called. "Come home before this becomes uglier than it already is." Home. The word went rotten in her ears. Then he added, softer, deadlier. "If I am forced to use the note on Mercer's ranch, the loss will be on your conscience as surely as his. Think carefully. What would you have done in her place? Open the door to save the man who sheltered you, or held your ground and risked becoming the reason he lost everything? There are moments when no answer feels clean, only necessary." Mara pulled the door wide. Josiah smiled instantly, then stopped when he saw the rifle. "There you are," he said. "Here I am. Put that down before you hurt yourself." No more than a person should before deciding whether to shoot the man trying to buy her. The smile thinned. "You do not understand the world. You need a house, protection, stability. Your father knew that. He did what he had to do. My father failed me. That's not the same thing." His eyes hardened. There was the man beneath the church manners. "Come with me now, and I'll overlook the embarrassment. Stay, and by thaw Mercer will lose this place board by board. Then I'll take you anyway." At the far edge of the yard, Eli had returned with the sled. She saw him in the corner of her eye, standing very still beside the team, listening. Mara kept the rifle steady. "No." Josiah took one step toward the porch. The crack of Eli's axe into the post snapped through the cold like gunfire. Josiah wheeled. Eli stood below the steps, shoulders rimed white, one gloved hand on the axe handle. "You heard her. Ride out." "This will cost you," he said. Eli answered. "Then I'll decide if it's too high after I pay it." Josiah rode away without looking back. That night, Eli sat by the stove long after supper with his forearms on his knees and his eyes fixed on the coals. Mara crossed to him and knelt beside the chair. "He meant every word about the note, didn't he?" "Yes." "Can you pay it by spring?" "A beat." "No." He turned so fast the chair leg scraped. "No." Eli dash. "No. You do not hand yourself over, because he knows how to wound in two directions at once. And you do not lose everything because I arrived here desperate." Her voice broke. "I won't be another grave this house has to carry." Something changed in his face then. Not anger. Fear finally exhausted enough to tell the truth. "When Annie got sick," he said quietly, "the doctor was 12 miles out and the coulee had drifted shut. I saddled anyway. Horse went down half a mile from the house. By the time I got back, Ruth was too weak to stand. Annie died the next day." He pressed the heel of his hand against one eye. "So when a man threatens me with another loss because I failed to protect what was mine once already, he isn't inventing new pain. He's reading the old one off my face." The room seemed to pull back around that confession. Mara laid her hand over his fist. "You came back," she said. He laughed once, low and bitter. "To fail slower." "No." Her voice steadied as she heard the truth in it. "You came back because love does not always save a person. Sometimes it is only the thing that stays. Sometimes staying is the bravest part." He went very still. Then he turned his hand and held hers, carefully, as if warmth were something skittish. "If this story is moving you, you are exactly who it was written for." A like and a subscribe tells us to keep making stories where quiet goodness is allowed to fight back and win. One evening, Mara found a cedar box beneath the loft eave while searching for lamp wicks. Inside were Ruth's wedding ring tied to a faded blue ribbon, a rag doll with one button eye, and a photograph worn nearly to ghost. Eli was younger in it. Beside him stood a woman with steady eyes and a smile that had once made the world look kinder. Mara brought the box down and set it by him. I wasn't searching for ghosts. He touched the ribbon with one finger. Ruth hated that ring. Said it caught on flour sacks. Then why keep it? Because some things are easier to love when you stop asking them to come back. He looked up. Take the ribbon if you want. Annie liked blue. Mara stared at him. I couldn't. Keeping isn't the same as stealing. Eli nodded slowly. People think grief is about what got buried. Half the time it's about what got used up after. She sat beside him on the hearth. Their shoulders touched. Firelight moved over the room in warm bands. Outside, snow slid from the roof in soft collapses. I'd have liked Ruth, Mara said. She'd have liked you. He was quiet a long moment, then added, if you'd come here in summer, I might have thought you were a passing thing. Winter doesn't lie about what stays. That line went through her like warmth after near freezing. She turned toward him and kissed him first. It was not hurried. It was the kiss of two people who had spent too long being careful with their loneliness. When they drew apart, Eli rested his forehead against hers and breathed like a man learning the world had not finished with him yet. Then the world came crashing back in before dawn, with Mrs. Hanley's grandson, red-cheeked and panting in the yard. Josiah Vance had bought the Mercer note outright from the bank in Casper. Payment due April 1st. No extension. Mara read the figures in Eli's ledger and knew the truth before he said it. You can't pay this by spring. No. Then we leave, she said. He looked around the room. At the stove fixed with Ruth's hands once. At the beam where Annie had been measured in pencil marks. If I go, he said, I spend the rest of my life knowing a man like him taught me what home was worth. I can't live under that kind of lesson. She understood because she had reached the same place. Running had saved her once. It could not become the only shape of her courage. So they planned not escape, but answer. Mara knew something more useful. The green ledger Josiah kept in the office safe, the one no clerk touched, where he recorded the favors, debts, and crooked arrangements beneath the mask of proper business. She had seen him lock it away often enough during courtship visits. If we get that ledger to Judge Corbett at Fort Laramie, she said, he loses more than a bride. He loses the mask. Eli rubbed a thumb along his coffee cup. That would be theft. And what would you call buying a woman with foreclosure? He had no clean answer. He stood in the doorway with his hat turning in his hands and would not meet Mara's eyes. Vance filed formal notice, Bell said. Claims Mercer is harboring property under contract and occupying land under default. He'll return with a warrant come first clear road. He laid a folded paper on the table. Search order. Effective Thursday. Eli's expression sharpened. Why are you warning us? Bell swallowed. My daughter turned 14 in January. That's why. He glanced once at Mara, then away. Judge Corbett hates forged land transfers worse than whiskey in church. If certain records reached him before Thursday, some matters might change shape. He left without staying for coffee. The storm on Wednesday was not large, but it was enough. Enough wind to blur tracks. Enough dark to make courage feel like madness. Mara and Eli rode into Bar Hollow wrapped in scarves until only their eyes showed. They left the team at the livery and crossed the alley behind the mercantile, with snow blowing sideways through the lantern light. The office window latch was where Mara remembered. Josiah trusted habit more than caution. She eased the sash. Eli slipped in after her. The green ledger waited in the safe behind the curtain, exactly where memory said it would. Then footsteps sounded in the store. They froze. Lamplight paused under the office door. Josiah's voice came, low and annoyed. Tomorrow. Not tonight. Another man muttered apology. The steps retreated. Mara's heart hit, so hard she thought the floorboards must feel it. Eli tucked the ledger beneath his coat and nodded toward the window. They nearly made it. On the back steps, Eli's bad leg slipped on hard ice. One board cracked under him like a pistol shot. Then came real pistols. Glass burst above Mara's shoulder. Eli shoved her behind the water trough and fired once toward the alley lamp. Darkness swallowed the passage. Run. They ran. Boots sliding. Snow in their mouths. Breath tearing their lungs raw. Men shouted behind them. The livery shed rose ahead like a black ship. Eli stumbled again. Mara caught his arm and hauled him the last yards. If I go down, you ride, he said. No. Mara dash. I have buried enough things. Not you. There was no room left in her for losing one more person to weather, fear, or another man's claim. She slashed the hitch line with Eli's knife. He fired the last round toward the alley mouth. Then they were on the road north, the mare lunging through drifts, the green ledger hard against Mara's ribs like a second heart. Judge Corbett read 3 pages in his shirt sleeves before sunrise and swore with such force Mara briefly believed the law might still possess a soul. By noon he had signed orders freezing Josiah's claims, seizing the mercantile books, and summoning territorial investigators. The ledger cracked open everything: forged signatures, coerced debt transfers, freight fraud, illegal liens, and private agreements for women disguised as financial settlements. Josiah tried to flee south with cash and a wagon load of valuables. They caught him at the Platte crossing with slush at his stirrups and one wool sunk to the hub. When he was brought back through town in irons, nobody cheered. They simply turned their backs one by one as he passed. It was a finer ruin than noise. By the thaw his mercantile was shuttered, his accounts stripped to satisfy claims, and every acre he had stolen was gone or in dispute. That was the justice he had earned. Wealth ruined, reputation destroyed, freedom taken, and the people he had tried to own standing upright in the wreckage he left behind. Spring came muddy and late. Calves dropped thin but living. Mrs. Hanley brought seed potatoes and a pie hard enough to shingle a roof. Belle repaired Eli's loft rung without being asked. The widow got her land back. 3 other families had their debts voided. The world did not become perfect. It simply became more honest. Mara visited her father in April. He had indeed been ill, though guilt had done more work than fever. He wept when he saw her. She let him. Then she told him, gently and without softness, that sorrow was not absolution. If he wanted her in his life, he would have to earn that place in smaller, truer ways than tears. For the first time since she was a girl, he listened without trying to arrange her future for her. When she returned to the ranch, Eli was waiting in the yard with his hat in both hands and spring mud up his boots. The house behind him looked patched, modest, and dearer to her than any grand place she had ever entered. "How did it go?" he asked. "Honest," she said. He nodded. That was enough for him. Mara climbed down from the wagon and stood before him with her heart beating like the first hard knock she had ever made on his door. "That first night," she said, "you told me some doors a man can still choose not to open for wolves. I remember. I was wondering if there's one here you might choose to open for me instead. Not the attic. The other kind. The one that lasts." For a heartbeat, he only stared. Then all the restraint left his face at once, and he laughed, rough and amazed, and nearly unsteady with relief. He crossed the mud in 3 strides, stopped close enough to ask permission with his whole body, and when she tipped her face up, he kissed her like a man finally laying down a burden he had carried too long. They married in June by the creek behind the house. No church bargain. No silk bought with fear. Mara wore a plain dress and Annie's blue ribbon in her hair. Mrs. Hanley stood up with her. Sheriff Bell, humbled into decency, stood up with Eli. People came carrying useful gifts: jars, tools, a quilt, seedlings, and a cradle made by the widower from Deer Creek whose land had been restored. Community is rarely loud when it is real. It arrives with something useful in its hands. 3 winters later, on the first cold evening of October, their little girl tore laughing from the house to the barn with a blue ribbon flying behind her, while Eli gave chase badly on purpose, and Mara stood on the porch with flour on her hands and supper warm on the stove. Above them, on the attic beam where only family would think to look, Eli had carved a single line: "The things that stay are the things that save us." Smoke lifted straight from the chimney into a rose-colored sky. Cattle moved slow in the pasture beyond the creek, and the whole wide world looked at last like something love had scarred, sheltered, and finally, gently, kept. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a lonely desert ranch because her family was ashamed of her silence, and the widowed horse breaker who became the first man to hear everything she was trying to say.